Women turn to prostitution for myriad reasons. Traditionally, they have sold their bodies to simply pay household bills, to give their children the opportunities and comforts they themselves may not have enjoyed, to satisfy the greed or resurgence of violence of a husband or partner, to give themselves the trappings of wealth, perhaps from a desire for adventure. In a handful of cases, simply out of a craving for sexual thrills. Nowadays, prostitution is frequently the consequence of drug addiction, the last resort to feed an insatiable craving created by the evil purveyors of the fruits of the opium poppy. It was into this vile, degrading, dank corner of society that there crawled a loathsome parasite named Steve Gerald James Wright, the Suffolk Strangler. During 6 terrifying weeks in 2006, the beast joined the exclusive club of serial killers when he brutally ended the lives of Tanya Nicol, aged 19, Gemma Adams, 25, and Ellie Anderson, 24, Annette Nichols, 29, and 24-year-old Pamela Clennell. Death, especially when violent, lays bare many secrets of the victim. By his evil acts, Wright sentenced the families of the dead women to the awful knowledge, not just that they had sold their bodies, but why. For them, the shame and misery is eternal. For their killer, it is an element of his crimes that remains unpunished. Wright's mother, Patricia, a veterinary nurse, was 16 and already pregnant when she married his father, Conrad, an RAF policeman, to legitimize the forthcoming birth in April 1958. His younger days were exciting and probably gave him a taste for travel, his father serving in Malta and Singapore. Perhaps, however, it was his service's background that caused Conrad to be a stickler for discipline at home, even after he quit the military to work at Felixstowe docks. Whatever the reason, it caused friction in the marriage, and when Wright was 8, by then with 3 siblings, his parents parted. Conrad remarrying soon, and giving his son, who stayed with him, a stepmother to whom he never felt close. Years later, when he became infamous and hated, Patricia, by then settled in the USA, said of her son, "He definitely didn't have it in him when he was a little boy. Steve was shy, especially in a crowd, but he was such a love when he was a child. I never saw any violence there. He was withdrawn, afraid of his dad if I wasn't there. He would hold his breath and pass out if he thought his dad was going to smack him." Yet, by his early 30s, her son had fallen very much out of love with his mother, telling her, when she flew over the Atlantic for a reunion with the family, "I never want to see you again." By then, he had held a succession of menial jobs, waiting on in the Suffolk Hotel after leaving school at 16 without qualifications, but then deciding on a life at sea. If he held dreams of visiting exotic locations, they were initially at least brought down to earth, and the only job he could get was as a dishwasher on a ferry. Still, the wages enabled him to marry Angela O'Donovan in Milford Haven, Wales, in 1978, and 5 years later, his son Michael was born. By then, Wright was already using prostitutes, usually those working in massage parlours or saunas, but occasionally visiting flats, where women, frequently accompanied by receptionists referred to in the trade as a maid, entertained their fee-paying clients. It was hardly surprising that the marriage did not last, ending in eventual divorce. Clearly, change was in the air, because as his relationship with Angela drifted to the inevitable end, he switched surroundings and joined the luxury cruise liner the QE2 as a steward. It was a situation made for a man such as him with an eye for a pretty girl. The few who, over the years, would become close enough to Wright to qualify as friends found him boring, at times self-centered and nearly devoid of personality. It seemed all the more surprising then that such a colourless individual should have a raging thirst for sex, even that form of sexual thrill when it comes through as an act of violence. The prostitute and personality, Lindy St. Clair, claims she was attacked by Wright during this transitory period, His work on the QE2 meant he at least was able to see those ports and places of which he had only dreamed a few years previously. He visited London, where Lindy offered her services from an impressive four-storey house at Earl's Court, and, at one time, a basement flat in Notting Hill belonging to an unsuspecting Norman Lamont, then Chancellor. She specialised as a dominatrix, using the name Miss Whiplash, and having among an impressive list of customers, MPs and business leaders. So prosperous was her business that she was able to own a yellow Rolls-Royce and sail her own yacht. But, according to her, it might all have ended prematurely and painfully following a visit from Wright when he tried to grab her throat while shouting, "I know you, I know you." She reported the incident to the police, telling them, "I jumped up and went out the door and ran onto the street." It was only after Wright's trial that Lindy realised who her attacker had been, but the matter had been taken no further. Among his fellow workers on the QE2 were beautician Susie Lampler and window dresser Diane Cassell. Divorcee Diane found herself being courted by the steward, who made the most of stops in New York, the Everglades, Los Angeles, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, the Seychelles and South Africa to wine and dine her. But she noticed too how his mood of tenderness could quickly turn to violence against her. Once, she said, he blackened her eye when she returned late to her cabin one night. He would never say sorry, and it was never spoke about if he was violent. It was no good talking about it, because he would lose his temper again. He started coming to the shop where I was working. If there was a male passenger or a crew member there, he would stand staring at me. He was jealous, possessive, but then I would be inundated with flowers to apologise. During a stop off at Hawaii, he encouraged Diane to go on shore with passengers and a group of crew members. She took advantage of the opportunity to see an island of which she had read and heard so much about. But when she arrived back on the QE2, she discovered to her horror a note pinned to her cabin door, and on it scrawled, "Slag, ho." Inside, she found he had polished off all the drink they had, then poured what remained down a sink. "You like Hawaii that much? I thought I would make you some grass skirts," he told her, and she found her uniforms had been cut to shreds. Diane and other crew noticed how Wright seemed attractive to pretty Susie Lampler. She was a real beauty. All the men liked her because she was a pretty young thing. She was too scared of how he would react if she suggested he was flirting with his beautician. But it was obvious to all of those watching that he fancied his chances with her. One day, she spotted Wright and Susie chatting animatedly, laughing and joking, with their heads close to one another, evidently sharing a private joke. The incident lasted 10 minutes. At the time, it meant nothing special, but in July 1986, Susie, who had left the QE2 to work as an estate agent, told colleagues she was off to meet a client in Fulham, London, who called himself Mr. Kipper, and was never seen again. Wright was on shore leave at the same time. Steve wasn't really one of the lads, and was on the periphery, said former QE2 shipmate Steve Alder. But he liked the girls. He would sniff around all the girls, and particularly the beauticians. Wright found himself a minor celebrity around this time when the cruise ship docked in Thailand and groups headed into Pattaya. He made a beeline for the local bars and brothels, apparently unconcerned that he and his shipmates were being filmed by a crew from the WHICKERS World Television team. They followed him into a bar, and he eventually appeared on the TV, stripped to the waist with his back to the camera and wearing red shorts. Later, shots showed him being kissed by a teenage prostitute. By the summer of 1987, Wright, then aged 29, had decided his future lay ashore. He decided to explore the licensing trade and discovered an opening available in the Ferry Boat Inn, a public house in Norwich. There was a snag. The landlord needed to be married, and so he proposed to Diane, and she accepted. They were married at the Braintree Registrar Office in Essex, but it was obvious to her from the very start that she had been used solely so he could gain the tenancy. Diane would later confide to a friend, After we married, we checked into a hotel, and at reception, he said to me, "Well, we might as well consummate it now." As a marriage, it was a disaster. Wright's appetite for prostitutes, his willingness to pay for sex, was growing. Immediately, the last customer had left at closing time. He left Diane to clear away, locked the main door, and vanished into the night. She knew where he was going. The ferryboat inn was sited in the heart of Norwich's red light district. Among the hookers who sold their bodies was Natalie Pearman, one of the regulars, who was only 16 when she was murdered in 1992. Her body was discovered dumped in woodland. She would not be the only woman to die when Wright was around. But even that was not enough. As Diane's friend has said, he was insatiable. Not content with hookers, he started having sex with a couple of local women. One of them had worked in the bar. During a party, Diane grabbed the microphone and told everyone, "I would like to thank all of you who knew my husband was having an affair." When the party was over, he gave her a real beating. The way he treated her was shabby and disgraceful. He didn't deserve someone so caring and decent as Diane. He was a lowlife who wallowed in the slime of life. Neighbours were appalled by the way he treated his wife. Elizabeth Roche, who knew the couple, said, "He used to strangle Diane in front of us. He would pin her up against the wall and put both hands around her throat. It would end when my ex-husband or I would pull him off, and he would come to his senses. He had an ability to have a violent row 1 minute and in a calm conversation straight afterwards, as if nothing had happened." The miserable marriage and the stint in the ferryboat inn did not even last a year before Wright had dumped Diane and gone off with a mistress in September 1988. That did not last either. He once again tried running a pub, this time the Rose and Crown in Plumstead, East London, with a girlfriend who gave birth to his baby in 1992. Like all the others, that relationship floundered when rows over his gambling and drinking became continuous. Diane, meantime, divorced her husband and later remarried. Wright tried a succession of other jobs, including as a forklift truck driver, but a percentage of his wages was spent in massage parlours in the capital. In 2000, remembering the fun he had in Thailand during his days on the QE2, he sold his furniture and car and headed east, hoping to put behind him mountain debts. He had twice tried one way out, parking his car in the lonely back streets and attaching a hosepipe to the exhaust, only to be foiled by passers-by who saved him. He recalled how cheap the prices were, but the young girls in Pattaya. But in Thailand, his addiction to bought sex only worsened his flight. The women, sly beyond their years, were experts at tricking Western customers, besotted by the sight of young firm bodies. What little money he had drained away in 10 weeks. When he returned to England to live in Felixstowe with his father and stepmother Valerie, he was in a pitiable state, mentally and especially financially. His father, Conrad, persuaded him to declare himself bankrupt with debts of over £30,000. He enjoyed the Sackford Golf Club, where the few members who spoke to him thought of him as boring, and sometimes he tried forgetting his worries by playing 2 rounds in a single day. But even then he would head off in search of an appointment with a prostitute at a massage parlour. Club professional Simon J. remembered the 19 handicapper. He was a quiet chap who always played in black. Even golf had a price in the monthly subscription that had to be paid. He worked as a labourer, then as a barman, but was sacked. The root of his problems lay in his need to buy sex, and for him there could only be one solution. That was to somehow make sure he did not have to pay. That was easier said than done. The street girls had their own pressing needs for money. Shortly after settling in Felixstowe, he was persuaded to go along to a bingo hall where he met divorcee Pamela Wright. They chatted and discovered they shared the same surname. He invited her out for a drink and they started dating, and in 2001 set up home together. In 2003, he was again working as a barman when he was once more fired for the theft of £84. It would be, for him, a costly crime because he was forced to give a DNA sample. In 2004, they moved to Bell Close in Ipswich. Pamela worked in an IT call centre, and he took a job as a forklift driver. Like so many relationships, once the initial gloss of excitement had worn off, it settled into routine. Their lovemaking became less frequent, and Wright, missing the buzz that the thrill of sex with strangers gave him, started visiting massage parlours, including the Oasis, the Far East, and Cleopatra's. Saunas or massage parlours tend to have a floating population of sex trade workers. Many women work in these establishments simply because they find them safer than the streets, where they are vulnerable to strangers in cars, or to excessions down back alleys with the risk of a battering, or worse, from a punter unwilling to pay. Safety is the plus. The minus is that the women have to pay a set fee for each client to the owner. This is usually set down as a towel fee, an excuse to charge a few pounds for the loan of a clean towel to a customer. It is the prostitutes who sell themselves on the streets who are murder victims. Two of those who worked for spells in Oasis and Cleopatra's were called Gemma Adams and Tanya Nicol. There were times when Wright and Pamela would go out for a drink. On occasion, they would visit a pub called Uncle Tom's Cabin, not far from their home. But he had a reputation of being moody and unpredictable, something of a Jekyll and Hyde character. Landlady Sheila Davis said, "Once he just shoved me out the way when I was sitting on the chair. It surprised me. I had annoyed him, but I don't know why. I couldn't believe he would do such a thing like that. It was silly. If you could speak to him about golf, he would answer, but you couldn't talk to him one-on-one. There was an awkwardness about him. He never cracked a joke, never contributed to any conversation." As the sands of their love life ran to a trickle, and finally to virtually non-existent, Wright became increasingly frustrated. As much as he loved Pamela, he continued cheating on her with prostitutes. Their situation became even more difficult when she began working nights, leaving for her job just as he was coming home from a visit to a local bar. Sometimes he would drive her to work. In the massage parlours, he was paying between £65 and £80 for full sex, sums that ate into his wages, but a solution to his growing spending on sex was about to land in his lap. On October the 1st, 2006, he and Pamela began renting a flat at 79 London Road, Ipswich. It wasn't far from the famous Portsmouth Road, ground of local football club Ipswich Town, tagged by their own supporters as the Tractor Boys. Even more of an interest to the right was that London Road lay in the fringe of the red light district. That was a fact of which Wright would eventually claim he had not been aware of when he and Pamela chose the flat. But it was not long, only a day or two, before he realised his good fortune and started taking advantage of the presence, literally on his doorstep, of the hordes of women offering their bodies at a third of the cost that he had been forking out at saunas. Those nights when he had dropped Pamela off at her call centre job, he would head back into the red light area to pick up a prostitute. Sometimes he would then motor out into the countryside and have sex with her in his car. But revoltingly and insultingly to the woman who loved him, on other occasions he would take a hooker back to the flat and have sex with her in the home he and Pamela shared. Then, after she had left, he would craftily clean his car and wash the towels to remove any giveaway traces of having entertained a visitor. Neighbours would later remember the late-night sounds of the wash machine or of him cleaning his dark blue Ford Mondeo motor. One of the women who frequented the area in search of business was Tanya Nicol, aged 19. She had been a happy, giggly schoolgirl until the cares of finding a job and emotional turmoil of taking up with boyfriends took their toll. Unknown to her mum Carrie, she was weaned onto her first soft, then hard drugs by so-called friends. Inevitable addiction followed, along with the nightmare of how to pay for the next fix. She saw how others solved the problem by simply selling their bodies, and went along a similar path to destruction. Tanya started working at Cleopatra's massage parlour, calling herself Chantal. At first it was safe and secure, until her drug taking and the effects of it drew complaints from customers, and she was told to work somewhere else. Word about her problems spread like quicksilver through the sauna grapevine with the result that all doors were closed to her. That left the streets. When she was 18, she was picked up by police for soliciting, but because she was officially an adult, neither Carrie nor her dad Jim were told. Had they known, her parents would have helped. At 11:15 p.m. on Monday, October the 30th, Tanya was walking around the red light zone when Wright stopped his car and picked her up. She was never seen alive again. 2.5 hours later, CCTV cameras spotted his vehicle on a main road out of Ipswich. He would later claim he had simply been driving around to fill in time because he suffered from insomnia. But was that really the case? Next morning, discovering her daughter's bed had not been slept in, Carrie's concerns began. When police were contacted, they decided to wait until the weekend in case Tanya had gone off with friends without telling her family. But 8 days later, Detective Chief Inspector John Quinton of Suffolk Police had called a press conference in which he appeared for anybody who had seen Tanya to come forward, and he announced, "We are extremely concerned for Tanya's welfare because of her lifestyle and the fact that she is known to work as a prostitute." On November the 8th, a young student named Roshana Quadis was on a coach crossing a stream known as the Belstead Brook near the village of Coptock. Looking out the window, she spotted what she thought was a naked body, but it was only a momentary glance. At the time, she did not report it. The brook was in the direction taken by the road on which Wright's car had been seen. As the police search for Tanya continued, one of her former Cleopatra's colleagues, Gemma Adams, aged 25, disappeared. A heroin addict like her friend Tanya, she took daily doses of the prescribed heroin substitute methadone, visited a pharmacist where she took her prescription in front of a member of staff in order that there could be no possibility of her later selling her dose to another addict. Gemma's mother, Gail Dawn, had not seen her daughter for 4 months and was unaware she was a prostitute. On November the 14th, her boyfriend had left her in the red light area to tout for trade. Wright had had his nocturnal activities curtailed since November the 4th because Pamela had been off work, first on sick leave and then on holiday, and had stayed at home. But she had gone back to the call centre early that evening, and he was strolling around the now familiar streets close to their home. He picked up a woman looking like Gemma in the red light area, and they had sex in his car. Then she vanished. When she did not respond in the early hours to text messages asking where she was, her boyfriend telephoned the police. Now the toll of missing prostitutes had doubled. On the first day of December, police were monitoring the red light area, in particular noting the registration numbers of cars that frequented it and asking drivers who they were and why they were there. One of the vehicles stopped was that of Wright. When he was asked, "What are you doing driving slowly around an area used by prostitutes?" he responded, "Prostitutes? I didn't know there were any here. I've just gone out for a drive." He was, of course, lying, but was surprisingly allowed to continue on his way. The decision to allow him to do so would cost 3 more lives. By December the 2nd, despite repeated appeals for help from the police and the families of the missing women, the trail appeared to have gone cold. Then, that day, Water Bailiff Trevor Saunders, investigating a blockage in Belstead Brook, a couple of miles from Ipswich, discovered the case was the naked corpse of a young woman. It was Gemma Adams. The following day, a Sunday, pregnant Nellie Alderton, 24, had been visiting her mother at Harwich. "Goodbye, Mum, I love you," she called as she left to catch a train back to Ipswich. Her mum had split from her husband in 1986 and 6 years later had moved to Cyprus with her daughter, who settled well on the Mediterranean island. But things changed for the worse in 1997 when the couple returned to live in Ipswich. Nellie, then 15, began taking drugs and went on the streets to pay for her habit. She had 4 spells in prison and was trapped in a cycle of heroin and sex from which there seemed no escape. None that was, until she met up with Steve Wright. She was looking for business to pay for her escalating drugs intake when he picked her up on the streets, took her back to his flat when Pamela was at work, had sex with her on the floor and a settee. She was never seen alive again. CCTV images would later reveal her preening herself on the train journey into Ipswich to her death. Searching for clues that might help them solve the murder of Gemma, police divers have been carrying out a detailed examination of Belstead Brook. The search was intensive and fruitless until they reached a spot a mile down the stream from where Gemma's corpse had lain. Then on December the 8th, wedged against the bank, they saw the sight that had been briefly appeared to Rosanna Quadras a month earlier. It was the naked form of Tanya. Police now had 2 bodies, but as yet nobody was aware that Anneli was missing. That afternoon, a 4th prostitute disappeared. Annette Nichols, 29, was the mother of a young son and had at one time qualified as a beauty therapist. But before she could put that into effect, her dream of starting a business, she fell into a hard drugs trap. Prostitution became the means to pay, and she was well known to the others in the red light area. As darkness fell, she was picked up by Wright, who took her back to the London Road flat, now empty though, Pamela being at work, laid a reflective yellow jacket and a lumberjack coat on the floor, and had sex with her. Then he killed her. On December the 10th, a motorist driving through Nacton decided to satisfy his curiosity by taking a closer look at what appeared to have been a tailor's mannequin dumped at the roadside near the entrance of a school. He did not linger. What he saw was the naked body of a woman placed in a crucifix position, her arms outstretched and her blonde hair carefully stretched out behind her. It was Anneli Alderton. 4 gone, 3 found. The pressure on Suffolk police for an end to the terror was increasing. There were many who wondered if the force, and especially Detective Chief Superintendent Stuart Gull, who headed the hunt, was up to the job of catching a serial killer. And things were about to get worse. That night, Paula Clennell, who had spent a childhood filled with innocence in the Northumberland coastal town of Berwick-upon-Tweed, before moving to East Anglia, where she fell into the traps set by the hard drugs purveyors, were looking for business among the punters who trawled the red light district. She needed money to buy more drugs. That afternoon, she and another prostitute had been taking crack cocaine and heroin in the home of a mutual friend. Drugs had destroyed Paula. Social workers had taken her 3 children from her, and at the age of 24, she could see the little brightness in her future. When the friend refused to give Paula more drugs money, she flew into a temper. "I'll show him," she stormed, and went off in search of clients. Paula was well aware of the dangers now facing those in Ipswich in her line of work. She had even agreed to be interviewed by a television crew, provided her face was not shown, and she was identified only as Kelly. Paula said she was a bit wary of getting into cars. Sadly, she did not apply her caution significantly strictly. She climbed into the Mondeo of Steve Wright, who took her to the London Road address, where he had sex on the floor with her. Then he killed her. Annette and Paula had both been reported missing to the police by December the 12th. That afternoon, a walker spotted a naked body close to the main A14 road, and just a mile from the spot where the killer had abandoned Anneli. He rang the police, who brought in a helicopter to search for clues and film the immediate area. Almost immediately, the crew told colleagues on the ground that a second body lay just 100 metres away. Annette and Paula were no longer missing. They were murder victims. Like Anneli, Annette's body had been laid in the shape of a crucifix, with her hair carefully stretched out. Post-mortems on all 5 victims showed they had all been strangled, their lungs hyperinflated, a sign they had fought for breath as they died. All were young, all took drugs, all worked as prostitutes to pay for their addiction, and had all been picked up at the Ipswich red light area by a man now known as the Suffolk Strangler. The hunt for him was on, but police could never be certain that while he remained at large, he would not kill again. While detectives went through the painstaking routine of interviewing and checking, forensic experts took a DNA from the bodies of Anneli, Annette and Paula and began trying to see if any matched profiles on the National DNA database, taken from men and women who had been forced to give samples when arrested in the past. One profile was common to all three victims, and it had a match on the database. A quick check showed it belonged to Steve Wright and had been taken after his arrest in 2003. Shortly before 5 a.m. on December the 19th, Wright was arrested at his home, where he was waiting for Pamela to come home by bus from her night shift. Told he was suspected of 5 murders, he said, "Let me sit down before I fall down." Pamela was still at work when the news was broken, and a friend had to hold her to save her from collapsing. While he awaited his trial, Wright wrote to his father Conrad from his prison cell at top security Belmarsh in London, complaining the family squabbling was depressing him. "This is a reply to your letter. You are right. You have never seen me angry before, because I am quiet and placid person. Whenever I get upset, I tend to bury it deep inside, which I suppose is not a healthy thing to do, because the more I do that, the more withdrawn I become. Because I have seen too much anger and violence in my childhood to last anyone a lifetime. I need to be strong to cope with this nightmare. Pam is my life now, and I will always stick by her like she has by me. She has made me the happiest I have ever been in my life. My head seems to be all over the place at the moment, so please try and sort this out. I know you are a proud man and don't like backing down, but you are the only one that can sort this out. And you say you want to help, so please, do that one thing for me. Love, Steve." At Ipswich Crown Court on January the 16th, 2008, Wright pleaded not guilty to the murders. His defence was that while he often used prostitutes and had sex with 4 of the 5 dead women, he had not killed any of them. 5 days later, the jurors were taken on a coach trip to visit the outside of his flat and the places where the bodies of the women were discovered. When prosecutor Peter Wright QC asked him, "There are a number of coincidences in this case, aren't there, Mr. Wright?" the accused man replied, as he would frequently do so during his cross-examination, "If you say so." The bizarre question and answer session continued. "Let's consider a few things, shall we? You selected 5 women from the streets of Ipswich, amongst others, and each of them died. Is that a coincidence?" "It would seem so, yes." "You selected 5 women from the streets of Ipswich, and on your own account, they all died very shortly after they left your company. Is that a coincidence?" "It would seem so, yes." "You selected 5 women in the order in which they died. Is that a coincidence?" Again, Wright replied, "It would seem so, yes." "It would appear, in so far as you pick up prostitutes in the streets of Ipswich, you have been singularly unfortunate." "It would seem so, yes." "It would seem your full DNA profile is on the bodies of the 3 women who were recovered from dry land. Is that a coincidence?" "It would seem so, yes." "It would seem that there are fibres connected to you and your home environment in respect of 5 of these women when the bodies were found. Is that a coincidence?" "It would seem so, yes." "As time went on, you decided that you would kill." "No, no way." That was a response with which the jury of 9 men and 3 women did not agree. Wright was found guilty of all the murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge, Mr. Justice Gross, said he should never be released. Wright at first said he would appeal against the convictions, but has now dropped any legal challenge to the outcome of his trial. Since his imprisonment, there have been calls for Wright to be investigated for possible links to the disappearance of Susie Lamplugh and to that of Taiwanese prostitute Kelly Pratt from Norwich in 2000. It has also been suggested that in addition to that, on Natalie Pearman, the files of Mandy Duncan, who vanished from the red light area of Norwich in 1993, and Nikki Hall from a village near Ipswich, whose naked body was discovered in 1999, should be re-examined. At the time he was jailed, Pamela Wright said she hated her one-time partner and wanted nothing more to do with him. "I feel sick, empty and disgusted," she said. But she has since changed her mind, telling friends, "I still love him and he loves me. I will stand by him until he walks out of prison." Her way will last into eternity.